So the most important thing is that we adjust the motivation in the beginning, and we want to find a way of combining this together with amassing accumulation and purifying negativity. So Geshe says, I will do this by beginning with the recitation with the 100 deities, Gandhila Gema. Okay, so you notice that we offer a mandala. Usually there is a tradition that we offer a mandala at the beginning and also at the end of the teachings. These are different mandalas for different purposes. The one at the beginning is a requesting mandala. So basically we're requesting the Lama to give whatever teaching is scheduled to be given in this occasion. At the end, when we offer a mandala, it is a thanksgiving mandala, where we thank the Lama and say, thank you, that was very well done. All right, so just to explain how we're going to proceed with the teachings, we are still reading from the first chapter of Khenso Rinpoche's text on the nature of the mind, that is called the mirror of clear light. So we have been reading from this chapter for the last 3 weeks. We have a little bit remaining and we will complete this. Once we finish this, we will start. So today in this session, we will start with the subject of Dura, which is collective topics. So when we do study in the monastery, we start the study with collected topics, because this is when we're introduced to definitions, and also we are introduced to the basics or the basic rules of debate. Okay, so it is very, very good to begin with collective topics. After we finish with collective topics, we will start with the subject of Lorig, which is mind and awareness. It's a very important subject because the presentation of the nature of the mind is very important. But when we get to Lorig, we will have to go into some logical arguments, and we will say, oh, it is pervasive, that it is this and this, or there is no pervasion, that is this and this. So let alone that we don't understand the nature of the mind, if you have to deal with these sort of typical exchanges of debate where it says there is privation, there is no privation, you would get totally confused, right? So this is why we do collected topics first. So at least we understand this debate language. So what does it mean to say there is privation, there is no privation? So once we have this, it makes it easier to engage the subject of mind and awareness. So although we will not teach Dura for a very long time, even if the Dura teachings are very short, look at it as an auspicious interdependence, as a connection, because we are following here the pattern of study that we find in the 3 great seats, the 3 great Gelug monasteries. Okay, so we're going to follow a similar pattern of study. Geshe is suggesting that for this Dura class, collected topic class, it's very good that you bring a notebook and a pen, and you keep your own notes. So as we will be, because collected topics has many different subjects, many topics. So as we go into each topic, you can keep some short notes of what this is all about. You know, there are some people who have very good memory. They don't need to keep notes. They listen to the teachings and everything stays in the mind. But we, as beginners, we don't have such capacities, and therefore keeping your own notes will be very useful as we're studying the collective topics. Another thing that Geshe is saying is, don't be disappointed if the duration of the collected topics is short. Also, Geshe was saying when we first begin studying in the monastery, the class or the tuition only goes on for about 15 to 20 minutes. Beginners cannot assimilate information if it goes longer than this period. Okay, so we will just try to follow the pattern and the example of study of the great monasteries. So the thing is that we all are seeking to find happiness, and we all are trying to avoid suffering. Every movement that we do, every activity that we do is for the sake of finding that happiness and for avoiding any type of suffering. There is a famous Amdo Lama who said that if you look, even the most humble insect or worm that is crawling in the ground, so the little worm that has no legs is moving. Why is it moving its body? It's moving its body seeking happiness. You find insects that are blind, and yet they are very active and they move on the ground. Why do they move? Why does the blind insect move? It moves because it's looking for happiness. And similarly, everybody in this world is forming a line and follows one activity after the other, chases one activity after the other, seeking for this happiness. So in the past, people used to move around in a more leisurely pace. People would have to walk on foot if they wanted to go from A to B, or perhaps if they had a horse or something like this, they could ride from one place to the other. These days, we board an airplane, and very quickly we can cover a great distance. So why is it that we cover the great distance so quickly? Why is it that we fly from one place to the other? We do it in search of happiness. And yet we do not know the method for finding this happiness. So we arrive in a situation and we say, looking for happiness, and we say, oh, there's no happiness to be found here. And what do? We go to the next location. We engage the next activity, again, looking for happiness. And when we get there, we say, oh, there's no happiness here. Okay, so this is the pattern. And these days, everyone is very busy. Everyone is very hectic. We're all looking for the same thing, but we're not finding it where we're searching for it. The Buddha has said that all happiness comes from the mind, and similarly, all suffering comes from the mind. And therefore, the Buddha has made it very clear that the one thing that is paramount, the most important thing to do, is to tame the mind, to subdue the mind. So everything the Buddha taught, everything included in the 3 baskets, in the 84,000 collections of the teachings of the Buddha and so forth, everything is for the sake of taming the mind. So everything we read, everything we study, everything that is to be practiced is for this purpose alone, to subdue the mind. Okay, so the most important thing to understand is that we are all under the influence of the mind. It is obvious for us ordinary beings, but also we see that this is something that applies to hearers and solitary realizers when they, even when they are at this stage of non-training. So with hearers and solitary realizers, we always make the distinction. You have those who are still in training and those who are not training. Okay, so we find that because their mind has experiences the bliss of peace, they choose to remain in equipoise for eons. So even if 1,000 Buddhas, even if all the Buddhas would try to raise them from that equipoise, they still are not capable of shaking that concentration. They choose to remain in that concentration. What does that indicate? It indicates that they are under the power of the mind. Their mind has experienced the bliss of peace, and they just want to remain in that state. So even if all the Buddhas are there talking, communicating with them and saying, you have to rise from this concentration, you, through this concentration, you have not still established your own purpose, and you're not able to bring about the purpose of others. You need to rise from this concentration, enter the Mahayana, and train to obtain the state of Buddhahood. And yet they cannot hear this, or they cannot shake, they cannot stop this concentration that they are in. They remain for eons in that. Also, when we look at bodhisattvas, even bodhisattvas are under the influence of the mind. What mind? In this case is the mind of compassion, the mind that wishes to benefit others, the mind that cherishes others. So influenced by great compassion and bodhicitta, they give away their body, they give away their possessions, they give away the root of virtue accumulated over the 3 times, and even for the sake of one sentient beings, they can remain for a very long period in the deepest hell of avicii. So what is it that gives the bodhisattvas the courage to do this? It's because they are under the influence of this mind, the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to cherish others. You know how we recite in Lama Chopa, where we say, bless me to perfect the practice of patience, where I will be of enthusiastic effort, where I will be able to remain in the deepest hell of avicii for eons, even for the sake of one sentient being. So this is what demonstrates how the bodhisattvas are under the influence of the mind. Also, if we look at Master Chandrakirti in his work, Entering the Middle Way, it has a verse where he talks about the bodhisattvas, and he says, they cut their body in pieces, and as they practice generosity, giving this away to others, they experience great happiness. And as they hear the words, give me, even hearing this word generates delight in them. Those who have the higher realizations and actually engage in these activities experience happiness greater than this. Is there any need to explain this? So it begins by describing the bodhisattva who, motivated through bodhicitta, is able to cut their own body in pieces and give those pieces to others, so give their organs to others. And that act of giving, it gives them great peace, great happiness in the mind. When they meet a beggar and the beggar requests for help and says, please give me something to help me, just the words, please give me, generates delight within their mind. So it says the happiness, the mental happiness that the bodhisattva experiences is due to their bodhicitta, due to the fact that they are motivated by great compassion, and that mental happiness they experience surpasses the mental happiness that hearers and solitary realizers experience when they achieve the state of their bliss. So is there any need to mention the even bigger mental happiness of those bodhisattvas who actually reach high levels of realization and are capable of actually engaging in these activities of generosity? So when we look at the bodhisattvas always think about others, and every activity they do is for the benefit of others. They don't carry out any other type of activity. If it does not benefit others, they don't do it. Now, on the other hand, for us, most of the time, what the attitude that we have is the attitude of self-cherishing, meaning we consider ourselves to be the most important. And as for the others, we tend to ignore them. So we have this attitude, oh, whatever happens to them happens. Who cares? I don't care. All right. We have had familiarity with this type of attitude since beginningless time. And the way that we operate is that we hope that something good will happen to us. We will win in a situation. And as for our enemies, we hope that they will lose. or that they will be defeated in some way. And when this happens, we are actually delighted. We rejoice, we delight in when the enemy is ruined. If that doesn't happen, then this comes a time of great sorrow and agony for us. So as you can see, there's a huge difference between the way that the Bodhisattvas operate and the way that we operate. So what accounts for this difference? Why is this difference? Is because the Bodhisattvas has generated within their mind stream the precious mind of bodhicitta, whereas we have not generated bodhicitta in our mind stream. So the presence or the absence of bodhicitta is what makes this big difference between ourselves and the Bodhisattvas. Okay, so the author on the text here has also composed himself a verse, and in this he says, these days there are a lot of people who mistake pride for special intention and seeking some immediate gratification, some sort of contaminated type of happiness. They sacrifice their life and body. And others look at them and marvel and say, surely this must be a bodhisattva.
Yes.
So it says, although indeed there are many who call this person a bodhisattva, and there are some people who are now renowned as being the great bodhisattvas, in reality, if you compare the activity of these people with the activity of bodhisattvas, you will find that the difference is similar to the difference of the water that is held in the hoof print of a cow and the water that is contained within the ocean. So, when you have an animal that is walking on the ground and they leave little foot imprints, so in that little imprint of the foot of the cow, there's a little bit of water that gathers there. So he says, compare the amount of water there that it gathers there with the amount of water that gathers in the great ocean. So he says, this indeed is the big difference that you will observe if you make the comparison. But if you try to express this, others will become very upset. So it is best to pretend you are a mute idiot and not open your mouth. So it says, if you try to go against what people believe, because all these people are praising this other person, saying it's a great bodhisattva, the hero, the famous bodhisattva. If you try to open up their mind and say, no, he's not a bodhisattva, compare his actions to the real actions of the bodhisattva. He's so small while the bodhisattva's activities are infinite. If you try to say this, you will find yourself in great trouble. So best to pretend you're an idiot and keep your mouth shut. Okay. And then he continues by saying, we live at a time of conflict, and this is a sign of degeneration. So, when we talk about degenerative times, so we live at the time of the period where there is a lot of conflict, this is an indication of degeneration. And then he says the bad behavior of individuals will actually will rise at the time of death. It will become evident at that time. I beseech the great holy beings not to be too disappointed with us ordinary beings. And then he concludes by saying that this is a verse indicating the distinction of the two sections of the text. So usually at the end of the chapter or at the beginning of a chapter, you will have a verse, and it indicates that you are demarcating the material. And then there is a description of the Buddha that actually explains the etymology of the word that we have, the Buddha, that is, or the enlightened being. So it says, he has totally destroyed all faults. He has fully developed all qualities. So these two meanings are included in the word Chanjup, that means enlightenment or Buddhahood. All right. he has totally perfected the two purposes of oneself and others. He has reached the highest state, and yet he is not beyond the influence of the mind. So even when someone has reached the state of Buddhahood, they are under the influence of the mind. So it says, because they are under the influence of bodhicitta at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. So from the very beginning, it is bodhicitta that governs the activities of that thing, of that being who becomes fully enlightened Buddha. So at the very end, it is due to the power of bodhicitta that the enlightened activities of the Buddha continuously, uninterrupted, benefit sentient beings. Okay, so it describes here the qualities of the Buddha. He says, always under the influence of the great mind, or sometimes we find this explained under the influence of great compassion. There are some who say great mind and great compassion can be explained in a different way. However, in most cases, they indicate the same thing. So let's say here, always under the influence of great compassion, in order to subdue disciples, physically will assume different forms. His body will assume different shape, color, size, at times ugly, at times ugly, at times appearing as a sick person, and so forth, in order to heal and benefit everyone. In terms of his speech also, we see that at times he's teaching existence, at times non-existence. He's teaching definitive and interpretative teachings and giving advice, even saying that you should kill the father and mother. So the first part about the speech, he says teaching existence and non-existence. We see that in the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. During the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught that phenomena are established from their own characteristics. During the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha said phenomena are not established from their own characteristics. And then we had the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is the fine discrimination, where he makes the distinction, and he's saying, in this occasion we say they are established, in this occasion we say they are not established. Similarly, this is how the definitive and the interpretative teachings of the Buddha came about. And even the Buddha has given the advice that says you should kill your father, you should kill your mother. This is from the point of view of the person that needed to be tamed, to be trained. So all the different expressions of the speech of the Buddha are indications, are signs that he is under the influence of great compassion and that he is very skillful in means. So the meaning of all this is that everyone is under the influence of the mind. Ordinary beings are under the influence of the mind. Hearers, solitary realizers, bodhisattvas, even the Buddhas are under the influence of the mind. However, the way that they are influenced by the mind is different. So from our side, we have to pick up an example, but the example that we have to pick is from the better ones. We take the ones that are better from, this group and say, I will follow this as an example. So we have to find an unmistaken, a correct way to be influenced by the mind. It is said that to come to understand the mind of others is extremely difficult. Although there are some who say, I can read the mind of others, I know what others are thinking. In reality, it is extremely difficult. Actually, it's very difficult to know your own mind. So imagine trying to understand the mind of others. The mind of others is not something which is obvious. It's not something which is manifest. You cannot directly experience it, isn't it? Therefore, you have to go with inference. And it's not easy to use inference and correctly understand the mind of others. There is this analogy that say that it is similar to trying to describe molasses or brown sugar, right? So we have molasses. So someone says, oh, how is it? How does it taste? Right? And the best you could say is it's sweet. And the person would say, how? But how? Describe it. Maybe you could say, oh, it's a bit like sugar. It's a little bit like chocolate. But this is the closest you could come to describing it. The other person cannot actually understand the taste of molasses unless they put it in their tongue. If the tongue experiences it, then it can understand the type of sweetness. Otherwise, the eyes looking at it will give you false information. They cannot tell you. For example, you cannot directly see and say, oh, it's sweet. Okay. So the analogy is there to show how difficult it is to understand the mind of others. It is something that you have to directly experience. It's one of the things you have to experience in order to understand it. So according to Khyentse Rinpoche, coming to understand the mind of others is more difficult than realizing emptiness. In general, we say that realizing or understanding emptiness is difficult. Why is it difficult? It is difficult if we don't have the accumulation. If you don't have the accumulation of merit and if you don't have the accumulation of wisdom, yes, it will be difficult. But if you can build up the accumulation, so for example, you build up the accumulation of virtue and you work on your purification, then it will become easy to understand emptiness. And why is it easy under these conditions to understand emptiness? Because you can rely upon many logical reasoning. Also, you can rely upon examples. You can come to understand the object of negation. And once you understand all this, it will be easy to realize emptiness. Whilst when it comes to realizing or knowing the mind of others is very difficult to understand it through examples or logical reasonings and so forth. So just to illustrate how important the merit is, Master Ayurveda in the 400 stanzas in the 8th chapter says, those who have little merit do not even generate doubt about this dharma. So this dharma refers to the profound dharma of emptiness. So those without merit will not even generate the doubt, thinking, I wonder what is emptiness all about? I wonder what it is, right? Those with merit will generate the doubt, which will destroy or it will shred the existence into pieces. So shred to pieces is like, you pierce a lot of holes into it. Right, so it's not intact anymore. You're destroying it. You're breaking it down. So it says it all depends on merit. Those who have merit, they will generate interest and doubt. Those who don't have the merit will not do it. Okay, so it continues by saying that it is very difficult we have said that it's very difficult to come to understand the mind of others, but there are those who argue against it and say, but wait a minute, we have ways of understanding the mind of others. So for example, from their physical expression, when the physical expression of a person changes, you can see, you can understand what they're thinking, or there is even physical reaction. So, for example, maybe the hair in the body stands up, they get raised hair. So someone might argue and say, no, they are physical and verbal indications that can act as signs that will allow us to have an insight in the mind of others. The answer to this is that during this time, the degenerative time, these are difficult times, and actually people are not honest. The average person is not honest. High-level bodhisattvas are completely honest. So what they say is exactly what they mean, and what they indicate is honest or truthfully reflects what they have in their mind. But these days with people tend to lie Okay, people prefer to lie. So they might have, let's say, a very pleasant expression. They might speak in a very nice way, but it could all be hypocritical, right? What they say and what they show in their expression is not necessarily honestly reflecting what they have in their mind. So people prefer to be dishonest and say lies. And what Khenso Rinpoche is saying here is it is similar to using the argument it is permanent in order to prove that it is impermanent. Okay, so you have to say, take this subject, it is impermanent because it is a product that changes. All right, this is the correct syllogism. So someone comes in and uses the wrong argument, takes this product, it never changes, therefore it's impermanent. So they say, it's permanent, therefore it's impermanent. Okay, it doesn't make sense. It's the wrong argument, the wrong sign. Okay, so because it is so hard for us to really properly judge or properly understand the mind of others, it means we never know who we're dealing with. We don't know if the person we are talking with is an ordinary being, whether it is a bodhisattva, whether it is a Buddha, whether it is a ghost, a spirit, and so on and so forth. And because we're not capable of understanding this, it says, it is very important that we do not criticize and we do not speak badly about others. Why? Because actually, if you happen to criticize or speak in a derogative way about someone who turns out to be a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, it is said that the negativity that you accumulate through this action will result in experiencing suffering in health in an endless manner. So as you can see, there are very heavy consequences. From our side, we don't know if the other person is a bodhisattva. We don't know if it is a Buddha. We don't know the level of the other person because we cannot see their mind. You cannot correctly judge the level of the mind of the other person. And therefore, the advice is to be very careful, not to criticize, not to deride others. So we are saying here that if you actually deride someone who's a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, you will end up creating very negative karma, and this will result in heavy suffering in the health. And one might think, well, this is far away. When is this result going to happen? It's not something that I can see directly. However, there's no doubt that this result will come. When we talk about maturational result, when we talk about next lives, when we talk about the law of cause and effect, those things exist, even if we cannot see them right now. They're not obvious, they're not manifest, like the milk that comes directly, immediately when you milk a cow, or the butter that you produce when you churn the milk, or the cuts that you create with a sharp knife that cuts straight away, right? So it's not something that we can immediately straight away see. However, those things will come in the future. There are future rebirths. There is the law of cause and effect. There are maturational results. And even whether those things exist, whether you accept them or not. And eventually the time of death will come. And definitely at the time of death, there is someone calculating the virtue and the non-virtue you have done. Okay, so Geshe was saying we can see that actually the concluding advice here from Khenso Rinpoche is that the law of cause and effect, the future results, future lives, all of those things exist. And what happens is that we all have to die. And what happens at the time of death? There is always calculation. There's always counting of how much virtue and non-virtue one has done. And since all of us will arrive at the time of death and there is calculation to be done at that time, we should all be very careful with our mind. So Geshe was saying we have come to the conclusion of the first chapter of this text that is entitled The Mirror of the Clear Light. And Geshe was saying, I hope it was beneficial and that in the future as well, we can revisit and study more of this material. Okay, so let's offer a mandala.